It's 13 years since the Swift came to India and turned the hatchback game on its head. This is the very first Swift, launched in 2005. It got that sweet 1.3 litre engine from the S team and looked fantastic, nothing like anything on the road. 6 years later came the second generation Swift, still one of the most popular cars in India. And now we've got the all-new third generation Swift. It's got the same engines, but it runs an all-new platform. How has India's sweetheart progressed over the years? That's what we're going to find out today. An original red Swift. This is the car that India fell in love with. Maybe after the Zen, no other car Indians really fell for as much as the Swift. It looked like nothing else on the road. And it had an excellent engine to go with it. This 1.3 litre engine made around 85 horsepower. It came from the S team and it gave the Swift really sprightly performance. When we first drove it, we all raved about the car. The gear shift, short throws, very quick, very direct. The steering, hydraulically assisted. It gave solid feedback. You really knew what the car was up to. The handling, the chassis, the balance, it really was something else. It was so involving, so exciting, such a nice, sweet car to drive that enthusiasts spent their money on it. I bought a red Swift. As soon as it was launched, I bought a red Swift, put bigger tires on it because that was one of the bigger failings of the car. It got 14-inch tires, 185 section, but it really couldn't grip as well as the chassis could handle. So it really needed bigger tires. So I put 15-inch tires on my car, worked on the engine a bit, put an intake, put an exhaust, sounded really good, and that was a great car to drive, really great car to drive. This car is 13 years old and okay, it does feel its age. The Swift was never built very well. The ride was stiff and that meant all these plastic parts started rattling, the suspension started rattling and the clutch on the petrol was also weak. But the minute you rev the engine, get it up to 6.5, man, it brings back all those memories. This car put a smile on your face and it does put a smile on your face even today. Swift sales didn't really take off until this car came in. 2 years after the Swift was launched, they put the diesel engine into it. It was the Fiat, the 1.3 GTD engine. Maruti branded it DDIS. It made 74 horsepower. Remember back then, the Swift weighed around 1050 kilos, so a little more than a ton. So it wasn't a heavy car. And with 74 horsepower from a diesel engine, plus the torque of a diesel. So when it came on boost, it had turbo lag. Those days we did have turbo lag, but once it came on boost, this car moved. Unfortunately, back then Maruti decided to give the diesel only 165 section tires, and those weren't really grippy tires either. But it gave phenomenal fuel efficiency. With just 1 bar of fuel, it would almost go from Pune to Bombay. Everybody bought it, and the Swift became the second best-selling car in the country after the Alto. Six years after the Swift came to the country came the updated, the all-new Swift. This one, launched in 2011, marked a big improvement both in terms of the styling as well as in terms of the powertrain. The K12 engine, it replaced the 1.3 engine. In fact, the K12 engine came 1 year prior in the old Swift, but on this new one, that was the big talking point. It had a new engine, new platform, new styling. Obviously, the styling was evolutionary, so it didn't look radically different from the earlier Swift. But in terms of the interiors, this was the big improvement, the big change. The K12 engine, it didn't have the guts of the 1.3. It didn't really have that real punch that the 1.3 managed to deliver. In terms of the power figures, it was not too different, to be honest. But the torque was lower and you had to wring its neck to get it moving. It still enjoys being revved. The gearbox is still nice, short throws, very precise. But it doesn't feel as enthusiastic as the first Swift, even though this one is actually maintained really well. And in terms of refinement, I must tell you, this petrol engine is actually pretty good. You can barely hear it. And that means you tend to hear more of the suspension, which again had improved in terms of its compliance, but not in terms of its refinement. While the figures of both the 1.3 as well as the 1.2 engine were more or less similar, the difference was that the 1.3 was a stronger engine, and that's why when you talk about all those turbo Swifts, all the turbocharging was done on the first generation car, not the second generation one, because this one really didn't take to tuning and it wasn't as strong as the 1.3. And so we come to the newest of the bunch. It is the diesel with the automatic. Now the automatic is an automated manual transmission, AGS as Maruti Suzuki calls it, but their engineers have managed to make it far more refined than other AMT transmissions that we have experienced. Of course, there is a bit of that head toss, there's a bit of that lag when it shifts gears, but it is slightly more eager and it is significantly more refined than AMT transmissions that have been around. It is no great automatic, to be honest, but for the price and of course the fuel efficiency benefits that you get is actually pretty alright. As for the Swift itself, this new Swift is based on this new Heartect platform, which is the same as the Balenos, and that makes it significantly lighter than the original Swift. Around 160 kilos have been taken off the Swift, and it does not feel light in a poor way. It's not like the doors feel very flimsy or the car feels very rattly. Far from that, the car still feels built well. It does feel more refined, more grown up in the way it rides over broken roads, and it still is fun to drive. But of course, with a caveat, the steering compared to that old hydraulic steering of the first Swift, this electric steering doesn't have the same feel, doesn't have the same feedback, it doesn't feel as connected to the front wheels as that original Swift. So it still puts a smile on your face, but not as much as that first Swift. Jumping into this from the earlier two generations, the improvements in terms of the interiors are also massive. Maruti Suzuki continues with the tradition of under-tiring the Swift, giving it tires for fuel efficiency rather than outright grip. I guess that's what buyers want, but to us enthusiasts, the first thing that you do is you put sticky wider rubber, straight off, even if it's a diesel automatic. The refinement of this engine is also pretty good. Compared to the original diesel, the decibel levels have gone down significantly. Of course, it still sounds like a diesel, but when you're not giving it the full beams, when you're driving it at 50%, it is very refined. And I quite enjoy the way this thing handles. I don't think there's any other small car, with the exception of the Ford Figo S, that handles as enthusiastically as the Swift does. The DDIS engine, the horsepower, nothing really has changed, but because the Swift is much lighter, it does feel more powerful, and it is more powerful. It is quicker to 100, and even with this AMT AGS gearbox, it still goes along quite well. You can hustle it quite rapidly down these twisty roads. If you enjoy driving, the Swift would be your top pick. And plus, now you get more space inside, you get better ride quality, you get better refinement, you get the option of an automatic transmission for the city, and I think it also looks good. Overall, the Swift will continue to rule the roost, if you ask me.